Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm your host, Jon Macri, and ranking season rolls on here at PFF after we covered quarterbacks last episode. It's now time to dive into some running backs. Love them or hate them, we're going to discuss them. And I say we, as I am once again joined by someone who isn't nearly as polarizing as the running back position. It's the always great Kate Magdziuk. Kate, we covered quarterbacks last episode. Now we move into a much bigger pool of players where we are sure to see some more variance in the ranks. So how are you feeling about this year's crop of running backs?
I'm feeling kind of good at the top, but let's be clear. There is a true dead zone in terms of fantasy running backs for me, and it's kind of a big one. So I think there's going to be a lot of variance in terms of like these middle round guys in terms of where various analysts have them ranked, because there are some committees here in the league that are like wide open for touches. There's some really kind of icky running backs that could be in line for some pretty heavy workloads, which makes them difficult to rank. Like, this is kind of a challenging offseason to rank the running back position.
Yeah, there's a lot to sort out with this position, more so than with the quarterbacks, even than what we did last episode. So this will be, I think, it'll be a fun one to get into and kind of give our perspectives on these players and where we have them ranked and all of that. So we're going to use PPR scoring here. We're going to reference Sleeper's current ADP. Actually, as of June 18th, spoilers, we're recording this earlier than when the episode actually comes out. So apologies if ADP doesn't line up exactly where you might be seeing it at the time of listening or watching.
We're going to have some massive trades as soon as we record. We're going to see Brandon Ayuk on the move. Like, we're going to, well, I guess that doesn't really matter for the running backs, but still, we're going to have some crazy splash signing. The Cowboys are going to trade for James Conner, and he's going to be RB1. Like, we're going to have something crazy happen as soon as we get this episode scheduled out, but that's okay. We're not going to let that get us down.
Yeah, I hope that's not the case. I hope the NFL can wait a week at least. But yeah, if something does happen and we don't touch on it on this episode, it's because we recorded a week earlier. But for those of you who are watching on the YouTubes as well, like, we simply ask if you can like and subscribe. It's a tiny gesture. It goes a long way, helps us a great deal, and we appreciate the support. So with all of that said, let's dive into our rankings here. We've sorted them again by consensus rankings, like we did with the quarterbacks as well. So just average of where Kate and I have each player ranked, and then we'll kind of highlight the bigger discrepancies as we go here, both from each other and from ADP. So starting right at the top, everyone is locked into Christian McCaffrey as RB1 this season, so no surprise there. But immediately after that, I think we get to kind of have our first discussion about who should be the next running back off the board, right? Because I have Breece Hall as RB2. Kate, you have Bijan Robinson as RB2. We're both close here because we have the other as RB3. But I think this is a good place to kind of start, because it is where I think fantasy managers will go back and forth on who they could target if they want to start at running back and they don't get CMC. So why don't you make the case for Bijan at RB2? I'll make the case for Hall at RB2.
You look at Bijan Robinson's rookie season, I actually think we're very, because of some questionable, red zone usage inside the 5-yard line, because of some of those shenanigans. And then there was like that weird game where he just sat basically, and they said he had a headache. It was weird. But because of all those weird things, we're forgetting about the fact that he actually saw 300 total opportunities as a rookie. That's rush attempts, targets combined. That he was tied for the second most targets among all running backs as a rookie, only behind Breece Hall, who we'll get to in a minute. But for me, this tiebreaker comes down to just my projections for the overall offense. I know Aaron Rodgers is coming back, but I alluded to this on last week's episode when we were talking about quarterbacks. I think this is just a much better skill position player group than they have with the New York Jets. And I think this is a much safer one that's going to probably provide more consistent opportunities for 20 plus touches a game. And I think a lot of those touches are going to be valuable ones inside the 5. I think the Falcons know what to do with Bijan Robinson now. And just given the overall trajectory of the offense, I gotta be all in.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's a lot of reason there to be bullish about Bijan Robinson, and he's RB3 for me. But I did go with Breece Hall as RB2. I really went back and forth between the two, so it's not like some ranks where I'll just take the guy I have ranked higher every single time. But really, probably going to end up being going back and forth between these two if I'm in those spots to
I
draft
mean,
them.
I don't
But
think you could go wrong, right?
yeah.
Like,
I don't think so, right? It feels like there's a reason these guys are inside that top 5. Like, we're betting on the volume and the talent and all of that. But yeah, like for me, Hall, he finished as the PPR RB4 last year on a putrid offense that provided him just one rushing attempt inside the 5-yard line last year, which he converted. But you know, at the same time, we're drafting Garrett Wilson as a top 10 wide receiver this season because we are betting on the improvement of that offense with a healthy Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. Then I think we have to imagine that upgrade allows for Hall to soak up some quality touches as well, right? Like, one of the concerns I have heard with Hall is that the Jets do seem to be stockpiling running backs, drafting Braylon Allen and Isaiah
mhm.
Davis, and they signed Tariq Cohen post draft as well. So I get the concern there. Like, it's fishy, but I think it's more about like having insurance at a position they know that they're going to have to rely on in what should absolutely be a competitive season for them, right? Again, assuming Aaron Rodgers' health, and Hall is a star, right? So they'll need their stars if they want to keep winning. And for me, like, there aren't really the same concerns about workload. Like, he's shown an ability to handle a heavy workload. He averaged double-digit carries per game last season, ranked second in targets per game at 5.5 this past year. PPR ranks make him, I think, that much more valuable for me as well. Like, so that did play a tiny part in it as far as putting him just ahead of Bijan Robinson. But I do believe, like, in his RB1 overall potential this season. I mean, I believed in it last year as well. But I think it's even more likely this year, right? Like, that opportunities for touches, I think is going to continue with an improved offense. Those touches do become more valuable. So for me, I think Breece Hall is going to probably be my RB2 for the entire offseason. We'll see. I've gone back and forth on it already, so I don't want to lock that in for sure. But that's where I'm leaning right now.
I think that's fair. The only other kind of tiebreaker that I want to bring up is the offensive line, which the Atlanta Falcons, one of kind of the most balanced, and I think one of the best units in the NFL right now heading into the 2024 season. The New York Jets, they did a lot to just totally overhaul the offensive line at this point, but I don't necessarily know that like it's a given, right? That this is
Right.
going to be a top 10 offensive line. So like in terms of blocking schemes, in terms of overall stability on the offense line, I'm going to give that to the Atlanta Falcons, though the Jets made several moves this offseason that should see them better, in a much better position than last year. I mean, they ranked bottom 5 or bottom 6 with a 54.0 PFF pass blocking pass blocking grade. Geez, this just wasn't a good unit. This
Yeah.
wasn't a good unit, and I have questions. So, like, if we are kind of parsing between these two running backs, which I think you can make a very sound argument for either at RB2, I'm still just going to give that edge to, Bijan, because I think, again, fewer questions for me and better offensive line. I don't know. Both are explosive playmakers that you can't really go wrong for.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Like, both of them are going to be in offenses with older quarterbacks coming off Achilles tears as well, and it's just like, I think, yeah, there's definitely like a case for both. Like, I again go back and forth on it. I like Breece Hall for PPR just a little bit more. I think, if I'm going half PPR, non PPR, I'll probably give the edge there to Bijan Robinson, but just a slight edge here for the PPR ranks for me.
Okay.
At 4 and 5, we're in line with each other there. Jahmyr Gibbs, Jonathan Taylor, nothing too crazy. But as we go on here, there's naturally going to be some more variance. And what's funny with these next 4 players for us, actually, like, they all averaged out as our RB6 based on where we have them. So it's a four-way tie between Saquon Barkley, Kyron Williams, Derrick Henry, and Travis Etienne. So I have Saquon as RB6. You have him as RB9, but you have Travis Etienne as RB6, and I have him as RB9. So let's start there. So same kind of thing with Hall versus Bijan. I'll let you make the case for Travis Etienne as the next running back off the board after our top five, and I'll make the case for Saquon Barkley.
I do think that this is a very interesting spot in the draft because this is where the question marks get a lot bigger, right? Travis Etienne, he's in a stable offense that hasn't undergone too many changes. Obviously, there's the departure of Calvin Ridley, but they brought in, drafted Brian Thomas Jr. They brought in Gabe Davis to kind of fill that other outside role. You're going to have a healthy Christian Kirk, which I think is good for the offense. You have another year of Evan Ingram, one of the most productive tight ends in the league. And I think the biggest kicker for me that just kicks this in Travis Etienne's direction, you're not necessarily going to love what you saw in 2023 season. Not the most productive outing, not the most efficient outing for Travis Etienne, but he saw a lot of touches and that offense absolutely funneled through him. I think with a healthy Trevor Lawrence, with those weapons they added, there's going to be a lot of room in terms of growth and efficiency for Travis Etienne. And I just think from a volume standpoint, like I'm not going to be as concerned about Trevor Lawrence, sniping goal line touches as I will be Jalen Hurts tush push style, right? Like,
yeah,
maybe that's the ultimate tiebreaker for me is the tush push and how many of those touches Saquon Barkley might miss out on. We still saw some good usage from DeAndre Swift in the the Eagles offense, around the goal line. Still saw usage there. It wasn't like, they were on the goal line and never gave him any touches, but that's a factor that you have to consider in terms of overall upside, right? Because the Jaguars aren't going to use Trevor Lawrence in that same way.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it too. And I mean the volume for Travis Etienne is great, right? Like I think a lot of people were concerned about the Tank Bigsby situation last year. Proved out to be a non-factor. I don't think it's going to matter this year either, right? So definitely a lot to like there about Travis Etienne. And
they
then
might have one of the least competitive RB depth
yeah,
charts in the National Football League.
yeah. No, I
Right?
agree. I think it's right there. And honestly, I kind of feel the same way about Saquon Barkley and the Eagles, like other than Jalen Hurts, right? Jalen Hurts is the one. So, for me, I mean, and what the internet was trying to tell me too, like this could be some very aggressive Eagles fans, is that Saquon Barkley deserves to be in tier one. And honestly, I did consider it originally, but I think, more to the top of my tier two just makes more sense when comparing him to those other five guys that we ranked ahead of him. But I do get the argument either way. And, with there being, I think, two clear ways to kind of look at it, how it could work for him or against him. That's why I couldn't do like tier one for Saquon, but I still really like him. Like, first off, he joins a loaded Philadelphia Eagles offense, right? And honestly, there is going to be more competition for touches than he had with the New York Giants. And he also has to contend with that rushing quarterback in Jalen Hurts, who had more goal to go carries at 26 than any other player at his position. So that eats into some high value touches there for Saquon. Now, I don't think Hurts, we kind of touched on this last episode with the quarterbacks, right? I don't think he's going to take as many carries again at the goal line. And part of the reason for that, I think, is Saquon Barkley being on the team and being one of the best running backs that they've had in recent years. And also no Jason Kelce as well. We'll see how much that plays into it. But I think an argument for Barkley for me is clear in that he is far and away, the lead running back on a very good team and will be the main beneficiary of the rushing and receiving touches out of the backfield on a way better run blocking offensive line as well. Like the Giants were bottom 3 in the league last year in run blocking grade, while the Eagles were top 3. So night and day differences there for Saquon Barkley to work with. And I think, considering what he was able to handle last year as a workload, 21.9 opportunities per game. And I think he can do something similar. I don't think it's going to have to be that high in Philadelphia because there's more players to get the ball to, but I think it allows him to at least be more efficient with those touches as well, playing behind that offensive line in that offense as well. So, yeah, I'm excited about Saquon Barkley in Philadelphia this year.
I mean, you couldn't ask for a more perfect circumstance to kind of balance things out. Because you're right. Like, even if
Yeah.
Jalen Hurts is involved around the goal line, like, there are still going to be a lot more goal line opportunities, period, to go around, right?
Mhm.
There's going to be a lot more scoring potential. So even if he does see fewer of those really valuable touches, like, overall, this should be a much more efficient offense. We'll see, how the offensive line shakes up without Jason Kelsey. They're shifting some things around, but like, all in all, I think you can make a very sound argument for either of these guys in this particular spot.
Yeah, for sure. And then after our picks for Saquon and/or Travis Etienne, we're both higher on Derrick Henry than his current ADP. So I could kind of start here if you like, and feel free to help me make the case because I have no problem with Derrick Henry inside the top 10. Like, even though ADP does seem to disagree just slightly, he's RB11 right now. I just don't know that we should really be all that concerned about him for at least one more season. Now, those might be famous last words for like the worst season of his career, but I don't think it will be. Like, it's no secret, obviously, that the
There's
Ravens
been no
offense,
sign of that.
yeah, and going to a new team, like, I think it's a good team to go to. I mean, the Ravens offense, it runs literally through Lamar Jackson, and he's going to get his carries, but that could also work really nicely in Henry's favor, right? So, since Lamar Jackson became a full-time starter in 2019, the Ravens running backs as a whole have averaged a league leading 4.8 yards per carry with 8.1 or 1.8, sorry, coming before contact, which is also a league leading mark, right? Like, Henry has never averaged fewer than 4.2 yards per carry in a season, even behind average offensive lines, right? So, we can be a little bit concerned about like Jalen Hurts-esque quarterback rushing opportunities near the goal line. And Jackson did take 10 of those in goal to go situations last year, but his running backs had plenty of opportunities. Ranking tied for third in goal to go carries last year with 39. Like, Gus Edwards 8 in those situations. So I have to imagine that Derrick Henry can definitely do the same. Doesn't feel like Keaton Mitchell will be that much of a factor this year after that kind of nasty injury last year as well. So it's just so much more opportunity for Henry, and it's hard not to love him inside this top 10, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting because, like, I think you could probably rationally construct an argument where Derrick Henry should be drafted above Saquon Barkley. Like, I think he's the better running back, period. But I mean, you look at the usage last year, Derrick Henry ranked second in the league in total rushing yards, 12 touchdowns, just over 1,167 rushing yards. So 280 attempts. We actually saw the Titans dial back his snap usage overall, but when he was on the field, he was utilized pretty heavily, average
Mhm.
4.17 yards per carry, to Saquon Barkley's 3.89. And you mentioned like both of these guys are getting like a massive upgrade, right? And both of them are playing behind a better offensive line, but and both of them are playing with a rushing quarterback. So like all of those things that benefit Saquon Barkley also benefit Derrick Henry. And I just also think that, looking at the kind of safety and the floor of Derrick Henry, it feels like we're kind of underselling Derrick Henry here. I cannot believe he's being drafted at RB11.
Yeah, it feels low. It feels low. I know he's older, and people are worried about that, but he's still Derrick Henry. And I think this offense specifically is just going to be tailor made for his skill set and just running guys over and racking up yardage. So
Ranked
excited to
8th
see what he
in the
does. Yeah.
league in PFF rushing grade last year. And
Yeah.
like what is so impressive about that is not the fact that he, ranks 8th among running backs cuz like yeah, he's Derrick Henry, he does Derrick Henry things, but like this wasn't a good Titans offense, right?
Mhm.
Like we knew it was Derrick Henry and literally nothing else. And he still managed that level of efficiency and production. So yeah, in this offense, maybe you have to worry about the touches that Lamar Jackson's going to steal, but you have to worry about those just as much with Jalen Hurts. So like
Mhm.
if you're looking at Saquon Barkley with hard eyes or googly eyes, like maybe just hit the pause button and come back around in the next round and grab Derrick Henry, because I think from an upside perspective, just as high, if not higher. From an efficiency standpoint, I think Derrick Henry's going to have the better season overall. More consistent running back play, like Saquon Barkley, very dependent on those breakaway runs. But like the same argument that you're making against Derrick Henry, you should be making against Saquon Barkley. So just draft Derrick Henry. Maybe I'm going to move Derrick Henry up my ranks even further. I don't know. I'm talking myself into it as we go.
There we go. All right, and then the other name that we have in our consensus, like RB6 group here, is Kyron Williams, but we're both pretty in line with each other and ADP. So there's let's move on to the next group here and start with another consensus tier here at what will be technically RB10. We have Rashad White, who we both have as RB12, but because of the consensus format and us being lower on the names, other names, he moves up here. And then also in that spot at RB10 is James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. So Kate, Cook is RB14 for me. I didn't vary from consensus, it seems, on that one. But you are more optimistic at RB10. So what do you like about Mr. Cook here heading into this season?
I think interestingly, like the perception of Cook is just kind of meh. But I keep going back to his usage in the second half of last season, right?
Mhm.
Like weeks 11 onward, he averaged almost 17 rush attempts per game on a pretty dang productive offense. Averaged almost 4 targets per game. Would have been on pace for over a 17 game span for almost 1,800 yards from scrimmage and 9 touchdowns. Like this is a good offense. We saw, a kind of shift in overall focus to a more run heavy approach in the second half where they really utilized James Cook as more of a workhorse. Even in the playoffs, 18 carries in each of his 2 playoff games, 4+ targets in each of those playoff games. Like, I don't know if James Cook is going to average 20 opportunities per game and he's playing with Josh Allen, who's obviously one of the biggest rushing threats at quarterback in the league. Like, yeah, that's going to be very helpful for his efficiency. We know he's super explosive. I think probably the biggest question mark that people are going to have is Ray Davis and what kind of role is he going to play in and around the goal line? Like, in Josh Allen, is he going to steal goal line touches? Like, those are probably the question marks that people are going to have. But I think from a usage standpoint, based on what we saw last year, we should be probably a little bit higher on him than we actually are.
Yeah. Yeah, I do like Cook. I like the talent there, and that was the question for me. Like that's really the only thing that worries me about him is they just were like refusing to give his little ass carries in goal to go situations last year, right? Like where not only like Josh Allen was taking the majority of them, like with 19, but freaking Latavius Murray had
That
more
was
than
annoying.
Cook, right? Like it's so annoying. And now Murray isn't there anymore. Obviously, Allen is, and I don't think he's necessarily going to see a decrease in those opportunities, but I don't think Cook is guaranteed to just absorb the Latavius Murray opportunities either, which is I think kind of a bummer. But
And you look at Ray Davis and like you see the body, right?
yeah,
5'8", 220 pounds. Like, dude's a tank. Like,
yeah.
I could very much picture Ray Davis coming in and playing that Latavius Murray role. But even despite the Latavius Murray role being a thing last
Mhm.
year, we still saw, maybe some of these valuable touches go elsewhere. But like, generally speaking, that James Cook is extremely explosive. Like, anytime he gets to the second level, he breaks one tackle, and he has the speed and athleticism to take it to the house. He's so explosive. I could just picture, you know, Ray Davis being less of a problem than anybody's kind of predicting. I don't know.
Yeah, I really hope so, right? And like, there's it's one of those things, right, where the NFL head coaches like they don't care about fantasy. Like they never miss an opportunity
No.
to remind us of that, right? But like it just wouldn't surprise me where they're just like, yeah, bigger back at the goal line once again, like Ray Davis 220, Ty Johnson, whoever, like 210, whatever he is. Like I know James Cook's small, right? 5'11, 190 pounds, but like as far as stuff run rate goes, 11.6% was one of the best marks in the league. Like he didn't really prove to be all that much of an issue for him. Like if they give him some more touches, like I think he's earned the right to get them. It's just that he's smaller, and I think they will, just the stubbornness of that, size thing at the goal line is gonna what kind of goes away from him. But I think he'll get touches. I just worry that it won't be enough kind of thing to be in that RB1 range. But I love James Cook. I'd love to be proven wrong in that one for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. After Cook and Rachaad White, we have another tie at RB12 between Josh Jacobs and Isaiah Pacheco. Both of those guys going in a similar range based on the ADP, but in our RB14 spot is where we do get a bit of a difference here, where Kenneth Walker comes in. Now, I have Kenneth Walker as RB18. You have him as RB11. So this might be our biggest gap so far because he's being drafted as RB16 right now. So he's another guy that, again, I like a lot of these guys, but you have him inside your RB1 territory. I'll let you kick us off here with a case for Seattle's top running back in 2024.
I'm going to be honest. Kenneth Walker is probably one of my most difficult projections in this range at this point. Like you look at the actual running back, Kenneth Walker, and last year by far and away the best running back in the Seattle Seahawks offense, but there is Zach Charbonnet who's kind of looming in the background, and you have a changing of the guard as well in Seattle. There's a new sheriff in town. Mike McDonald, will see who he takes a liking to, but both of these guys have similar draft caps. So like I understand all of that, and I think it's all very fair, but I just think from a pure skills perspective, Kenneth Walker is one of the most talented running backs in the NFL. I have a hard time believing that like he's just going to fall off the face of the earth, right? Like 16 plus rush attempts in all but 6 of his games last year. I think if that kind of usage sticks up, like I don't think Zach Charbonnet really did anything to earn more of those touches, largely speaking. I don't know. Again, I'm kind of like, I'm trying to make the case here, and I'm honestly probably doing a terrible job because it feels like he should be RB11, and help me. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's a
he's
challenge.
a weird one, right? Because I also started with him a lot higher, and then just because it was a PPR ranking, like I did find myself moving him down, like just ever so slightly, because I don't think he has enough of, like, I think the carry volume is good. I do think that it just doesn't have the pass catching upside, which I think was a little bit concerning for me. Like of all the players within my kind of top 18, right? So Walker's running back 18, like Walker had the second lowest opportunity per game in 2023. So combining those carries and targets at just 14.4 per game, and then 2.3 targets per game. So I don't know how much that's really going to improve this year. Like you said, with a new coaching staff coming in, it could.
That's why
But
it's so hard.
could not, right? Yeah. So like
There's not a ton of data to actually point out that Kenneth Walker should be drafted this high. Like from a statistical standpoint, from the analytics, there's not a ton there, but from an efficiency standpoint that this offense probably going to take another step forward, I think, just based on the new personnel and the new scheme they're bringing in. And the thing about Kenneth Walker is just like the upside, right? Like, even though I have him ranked, we have him ranked at RB14, like, would you not agree that he has a lot more upside than like an Isaiah Pacheco?
I like Pacheco a little bit more. I don't know. I
From
think
an upside standpoint?
I think so, right? Like only because like I think with Seattle's approach, we'll see what it is. Again, we don't know. It's a projection, right? We don't know what Seattle's offense is going to look like. Where Pete Carroll was, he comes from that run first philosophy as well, right? And that led to 13.6 PPR points per game for Kenneth Walker, right? Where I think there's at least opportunity. I mean, Kansas City's offense, I think, is going to be better than Seattle's, right? So I think there's going to be more goal line opportunities there for him. I don't think anybody in the Kansas City backfield is as good as what Zach Charbonnet is. So like there's always the potential for year 2 Zach Charbonnet to get a few more touches as well. Because I don't think he was terrible last year by any means, but like again, he was a rookie as well. So I think there's a chance that, you know, this new coaching staff coming in finds use for him and finds him to be somebody that can spell Kenneth Walker a little bit more. But yeah, that's a good question. Upside
I
wise,
think
it's
that's
got to be
totally
close,
fair.
right?
But like looking at Isaiah Pacheco, things couldn't have been better for him
No.
in 2023. He was the lead back. He only had 6 total top 12 finishes. That was only 2 more than Jerome Ford, who I
Mhm.
can draft about, I don't know, a bajillion rounds later. And he's probably going to lead his own respective backfield, considering Nick Chubb's injury and depending on how he comes back. But like, you also look at, you know, some of the injury history. Like the Chiefs might realistically want to get somebody more involved in this offense in terms of the running back position, because ranked as the RB 15 in fantasy points per game, averaged 14.6 rush attempts per game. But like with all of that production also came injuries. 2022 he had a shoulder injury, underwent off-season surgery. Then he injured the same shoulder again. He missed time, like had a concussion. Like it feels like, I don't know. I think Kenneth Walker's upside is much higher just based on my projection of the Seahawks offense in
Mhm.
general. But
Yeah.
there's still a lot to be seen about, again, like who this coaching staff is going to prefer. What kind of rushing opportunities, how many rushing opportunities are we going to have? Like, if we're projecting this to be more of a defense focused ball control offense, like maybe there's enough room for Kenneth Walker and, you know, Zach Charbonnet to go around. But I at least think he has more upside than Pacheco.
Yeah, no, it's fair. It's a good point, right? And I think, you know, Seattle, they were a below average offense pretty much across the board last year. I think they have a chance here to kind of rebound a little bit under new coaching staff and offensive philosophy. So yeah, there's definitely a world here, right? Where Kenneth Walker, like I wouldn't rule that out at all. I don't mind that one. And then okay, let's go into the next tier or grouping, whatever we want to call it. And this one starts off with maybe the most divisive name this season because
Mhm.
our consensus RB15 is the efficiency god from last year, Devon A-Chain of the Miami Dolphins. And this is going to be, I think, a constant conversation all off season long where we just won't know until the season starts, you know, what his usage is going to look like. And I think that's part of what has people split on him, us included, right? Because he's going so high in drafts right now. He's RB9 in ADP. He was actually RB8 when I finalized my ranks last week, and I really thought I'd be low on him at RB20 or RB10, sorry. And you know where there are gonna be people clamoring him for him to be higher than that. You have him at RB20, right? So since I'm the two of us who is much higher on A-Chain, I'll have to assume the devil's advocate role of why I think, you know, this is the right price for him. And ultimately it does come down to upside, right? Where we saw that explosiveness and efficiency last season on a limited workload that was essentially league winning production when he was in the lineup, right? He delivered 18 PPR points per game on just 12.8 opportunities per game, which was significantly less than anyone else among those top scorers at the position. Now, his efficiency last season was so insane. We have to expect some regression there, right? Like, there's no way he's averaging 7.9 yards per carry again, especially if he gets more touches. It's just not going to happen, right? So even looking at his splits from the beginning of the year, so week 1 to 5 pre-injury to when he got back in the lineup weeks 11 to 18, like he was first in yards per carry at 12.1. He was first in first down touchdown rate. He was first in missed tackles forced per attempt. He was first in yards after contact per attempt. He was first in explosive run rate. He was first in stuffed run rate, as in like he had the lowest stuffed run rate. He was first in rushing grade. Like, just ridiculous. But it was also a smaller sample of just 38 carries across 4 games. Then he got hurt, missed time, wasn't quite as effective, right? So weeks 11 to 18, when he was back in the lineup, 64 carries, 5.4 yards per carry, which was still tied for second at the position, 23.4% first down touchdown rate. That was 21st, 0.22 missed tackles forced per attempt. That was tied for 16th. And then he was, top 5 in a few other categories, right? Yards after contact per attempt, explosive run rate, rushing grade was all top 5 there as well. So even there, right? Like the numbers do come back down to earth, but he's also probably not fully healthy in that stretch. Still posts a lot of top 5 numbers in there because of that game breaking speed and upside where he can win you your week with just a run or two. And I definitely think he's going to get more than one run per week. So don't get me wrong. It's a lot to ask to draft him top 10, end of the second round. A lot of the times he's more of the third round swing for me, but he's one of those lottery tickets where if he hits, then he could help you win your league. So I think it's just a matter of, is that a risk you're willing to take with Devon Achane? You have him a lot lower. Tell me why it's a bad spot to take him.
I have him at RB20, and I'm going to be honest, I have Raheem Mostert just behind him at RB22. I wouldn't be surprised if throughout the course of the offseason, I want to see like kind of how things play out in training camp, what their usage looks like. But I still think every single move that the Dolphins are making tells us that they want more bodies to touch the ball. They don't want to just feed it to Devon Achane, despite the fact that we very much want him to because of all of those efficiency metrics that you laid out. But here's the thing. Despite the fact that he had so few touches, again, very efficient with those touches, but even despite fairly limited usage, he still had several injuries last year that impacted his overall availability. Suffered an injury in the preseason, suffered the knee injury, re-injured the knee. Like, and he wasn't even close to a full-time role yet. So what do? They sign Raheem Mostert to a 2-year extension this offseason. You have Mike McDaniel coming out and said, talking about the backfield, which he says he made it a point to say is led by Raheem. Then you look at the usage last year, right? And you look at the usage of, specifically these two running backs in these very important, goal to go situations inside the red zone. It wasn't even close. Raheem Mostert dominated those touches. He ranked third in the league among all running backs with 20 carries inside the 5-yard line, contributed in a big way to those, bajillion touchdowns he had, ranked 6th in terms of carries inside the red zone. This is an offense that wanted to use Raheem Mostert in these critical situations. And he's the bigger back. That makes sense. He's also been fairly healthy. I think there's kind of an overblown narrative right now that Raheem Mostert is always injured because for the last 2 seasons, he's missed 2 games. Like, he has not been that bad, but like Raheem Mostert, again, the overall RB5 last season, and he was their guy in these crucial situations. And I haven't even brought up the fact that they drafted Jalen Wright out of Tennessee, who I said I had a ton of question marks coming out of the draft process, but this is probably the most favorable landing spot that he could have had, right? And they traded a future 3rd round pick to get him at that point. I don't know. I mean, Achane, 5 total carries inside the 5, 20 for Raheem Mostert. Like, that usage tells me a lot. They want to use Raheem Mostert as their primary running back. I think Achane gives himself an excellent case to be utilized as the best change of pace back in the league. But also with that is going to come a lot of volatility. He finishes the top 5 running back in 4 weeks, 4 different instances last year, but he also finishes the running back 64, running back 62, running back 24, running back 29, running back 51. Like, there's a lot of variance, despite that upside. He might win you a week, but he could also lose you a week, especially when you're having to draft him as maybe the overall RB10. Like, he could be your RB1 and you don't even know if he's going to touch the ball 12 times a game. That's scary.
There's a lot of risk, right? Like that is the biggest issue I have with Achane is that price is so risky.
Too much.
Like it's high, right? Like, and that's where like I was like, I like taking swings. Like I like to take the league winning potential swings here. But even like RB8, that was too rich for me. So RB10, and yeah, maybe I can move him down a little bit closer, but a little bit further. But yeah, if we're taking potential league winning swings as well, like Raheem Mostert at like RB24, where he's being drafted, like that's a lot safer of a league winning swing than what Devin Achan is, right? So he is obviously 32 years old, whatever it is for Raheem Mostert, so it could fall off, but he didn't really show any signs of that last season
The
either,
thing
right?
is,
So
he's not a real 32 years old, right? Because he was barely utilized for like the entire duration of his rookie contract. So like from a touch perspective, he doesn't have the volume of touches
mhm,
that a typical 32-year-old running
yeah,
back would have. So like it's not really apples to apples. And I
mhm,
think that Raheem Mostert and Devin Achan are going to finish a lot closer in the rankings if Raheem Mostert doesn't just outscore him outright. And again, like looking at underdog ADP right now, RB28, RB28, and
yeah,
you have
that's
similar upside. And on a week to week basis, he's probably going to be the goal line option. So, like, am
yeah.
I out of my mind?
No, I like that. I love that for Raheem Mostert, and yeah, it's risk
If you
reward
love that
with
for Raheem
Achan.
Mostert, you have to hate it for Devin Achan. I get the upside, but like
Yeah,
you cannot invest in Devin Achan as your RB1 for fantasy when you don't know if he's going to touch the ball 12 times. Like I understand the upside is tremendous, but like you know who's probably going to win me more weeks and not lose me as many weeks? Like maybe a Derrick Henry,
mhm,
who, I can still draft after Devin
that's
Achan.
true.
But like
Yep.
league winning or week winning upside without necessarily the overall risk that I think
Yeah.
you're taking with Achan. I just
Yeah.
like, I think he's the most overblown fantasy asset. And again, this is not from like a skill perspective, but like
Mhm,
we project, like we're projecting, it's kind of like what we did with Derrick Henry, honestly, in the first couple of seasons of his career. We wanted him to get the ball. And
right.
you know what? Like the coaching staff said, no, like we're not giving him the ball. Dion Lewis, like the Dion Lewis is there. How could we possibly give him like, but we just kept drafting Derrick Henry high because we wanted to see Derrick Henry be used, even though the tea leaves were telling us that probably wasn't going to happen. The narrative eventually changed when it came to Derrick Henry. And suddenly, like the reports told us that yes, Derrick Henry has taken over the backfield. This is Derrick Henry's job. And then guess what? They backed that up on the field. And, suddenly he exploded as one of the best running backs in the league. But like, I just think people have absolute blinders on and they just don't want to admit that the Dolphins are giving every indication that he's not the lead running back. I don't know.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a good point. Like you said, it's super super risky at that cost right now. So it's a matter of, do you want to take the risk? Can you live with the potential downfall of that cost, and then for the potential league winning upside, right? So that's kind of where we're at with Achan right now at this point in the off season. But after Achan for us, it is James Conner, who we're both higher on than ADP, but we also did provide a lot of our thoughts on him in the ADP Risers Fallers episode. So people could go back and listen to that if they want to, if they haven't, to save some time, not rehash a lot of those thoughts. But after Connor, we have Aaron Jones and DeAndre Swift, followed by another one of our bigger discrepancies here in Joe Mixon, who I have as RB15, but Kate, you hate Joe Mixon. You have him as yeah, I'm joking. You have him as RB26. So let's talk about him for a minute here. Do you want to start with this one, or should I?
I'll give my spiel, and I
Okay.
am probably being harsher on Joe Mixon than I really need to be. But like my question to you, and I'm not saying from like a skill perspective, but like I kind of am. In a way, not really. I'm not really saying this, but like I want you to theoretically ask yourself, like Joe Mixon, the player, is a good football player, right? But like he's been grossly inefficient,
Mhm.
and that was a big problem for him in 2023, and it just has been throughout his entire career. To be quite honest, like He's been pretty dependent on high volume and touchdown, like potential touchdown upside. But he's averaged fewer than 4 yards per carry in 3 of his 7 career seasons. He's racking up a ton of touches, right? So like definitely having some worse for the wear. But I mean, the dude literally 4 yards per carry in 2023. And that's the best number he's posted in a good amount of time. Like, how much more efficient is Joe Mixon at this point in his career, heading into his age 28 season, where he's already shown plenty of inefficiencies? Like, is there that big a difference between Joe Mixon and Devin Singletary?
I don't think so.
I don't think the
But I
gap
think
between
it's
them is as big as it is in your head.
yeah. Yeah. Well, so yeah, Joe Mixon, like he's not the most efficient runner of the ball, right? Like, but he's always kind of been this volume magnet, which I think that's the part of me that I don't think is going to change all that much on a new team this year, right? Like averaged 18.9 opportunities per game last season. That was one of the 10 best marks in the league. It was relied on heavily in the red zone near the goal line. But also like he's a reliable running back. Like I know he's not amazing by any means. He hasn't fumbled in 2 seasons on over 500 carries, just a 16% stuffed run rate, which was 11th best last season. Like by comparison, like his the other option for Houston seems to be Dameon Pierce, who had a 24.8% stuffed run rate, which was the 4th worst in the league among the same qualifying running backs. He had 4 fumbles as a rookie, none last year, but didn't touch the ball as much. And then 64.0 rushing grade, averaging fewer than three yards per carry, right? So again, like Mixon's not amazing, but he's also way better than Dameon Pierce. And I don't think Houston's going to be afraid to ride Mixon here like they did with Devin Singletary, who had success last season, right? Where when he took over as the actual starter, so week 9 and into the playoffs, Devin Singletary averaged 18.6 opportunities per game, which is almost perfectly aligned with Mixon's 18.9 last year in Cincinnati. And I think with the offense, like as good as it is as well, like Mixon, he's going to continue to get the high value touches near the goal line, just like he was kind of with the Bengals. So that's kind of what I'm considering more for him. And you know, as an RB2 for me, like I'm pretty happy with that potential volume, or at least that projected volume for him. So yeah, that's why he's a bit higher for me.
My only question is, of course, the level of competition, the backup realm, not all that enticing like Dameon Pierce. There's no doubt that Joe Mixon is tiers above Dameon Pierce. But I also just kind of have the question, like, I think a lot of the moves the Texans have made this offseason are indicating that they want the ball in CJ Stroud's hand,
Mhm.
like the trading for Stephon Diggs on a 1-year, what eventually became a 1-year contract, bringing back Nico Collins. You have a healthy Tank Dell. Like, I think we're going to see a relatively pass heavy attack. I do think
Mhm.
those high value touches are probably going to be, all belonging to Joe Mixon at the running back position. But I still think they've got a lot of weapons that they can consider using in the red zone to make to get those high value opportunities. I'm probably too low on Joe Mixon, and I might have overcorrected. I just like I don't know.
But no, I get it. Like yeah, I mean, Houston, they definitely have a lot of weapons, right? Like the ball's going to be spread around here quite a bit. They were a pass heavy team last year as well, though, and we did get some decent fantasy relevancy there from Devin Singletary when he took over that role. So that's all it was for me, like just projecting the volume and potential for those touchdowns as well. But right after Mixon, we have another name that I'm higher on, you're lower on, Kate. It's Alvin Kamara. He's my RB17, your RB24. So this is definitely one, like I could definitely see myself being lower on him, but this is where I think PPR versus, half PPR, non PPR makes like a huge difference for me, more than maybe any other player, because Kamara hasn't been nearly as effective as he once was as a runner. He's hovered around 4 or lower in yards per carry in each of the past 3 seasons. Not as dynamic at creating with the ball in his hands either, as like missed tackles forced and yards after contact kind of drop off, all those kinds of things. But there just isn't like a running back who commands a higher volume of targets at the position. And that just makes him so valuable, I think, in this scoring format, that I have a hard time keeping him outside of my top 20. 6.6 targets per game last year. That was the most at the position. 86 targets on the year as a whole, which was just 4 behind Breece Hall, who played all 17 games. Kamara played 13. It was low on the touchdown total last year, only 1 receiving touchdown and 5 rushing touchdowns, and still averaged 17 and a half PPR points per game because you just saw so much volume. Like, I like Kendre Miller. I think there's a good chance that Kendre Miller eats into some of the carries from Kamara, but I'm not as concerned about him taking those targets away from him. So 20 and a half opportunities per game last year for Alvin Kamara. He can spare them some there and still kind of be an RB2 in PPR for me. So how about you? How you feeling about Kamara this year?
I am a little bit down on Alvin Kamara, and a big part of that is just how much I really like Kendre Miller. I
Mhm.
think from, if you look at the box score for Kendre Miller, not at all inspiring whatsoever. But if you watched his what I'm going to say that his final game of the season, week 18 against the Falcons, was what I think his only healthy game was of the entire season. Had 13 rush attempts, 73 rushing yards, and a score. And man, he looked good. He looked absolutely freaking incredible. And that was his first really healthy opportunity. He dealt with a lot of injuries. Coming out of TCU, he was dealing with an MCL injury. It seems like I think that kind of like nagged at him a little bit, but he's healthy now. And I do think that the tape was a lot better than you would probably guess, considering his overall box score, an 81.1 PFF rushing grade in that week 18 matchup against the Falcons. And the Falcons, I think, like, solid enough, right? Like, it's not like they were a pushover
Mhm.
defense necessarily. I like Kendre Miller. I like his efficiency metrics, pointing back to an article I did like just a couple of weeks ago, I think here, highlighting some potential breakout candidates based on, PFF stable metrics. Solid rushing grade, 86th percentile in terms of missed tackles forced per attempt, 79th percentile in terms of yards after contact per attempt, 98th percentile in yards per route run. Like, he has a pretty encouraging profile overall. And
Mhm.
I thought the production coming out of TCU was very encouraging. And again, just seeing the tape when I thought he was fully healthy, I think that's going to eat into it. But there's also the part that we haven't talked about, which is the contract. And Alvin Kamara had been holding out due to a contract dispute. I think he just has about $1 million guaranteed left on his deal. So I think
Mm.
he's hoping to, either get a restructured contract, which I don't think would be a good idea. They've already got some void years tacked on to the end of his contract, but they definitely need money. There's no doubt about that. Like, they're hurting for cap space now and in the future, and they can save quite a bit of money by cutting him. I could picture if, let's say, after this spring program, they're evaluating the future of the position, right? They evaluate Jamal Williams, who's coming off a down year. They evaluate how much Kendre Miller has taken a step forward, and evaluating all of these aspects. Would you be surprised if they released him before as a cap casualty, or even if Kamara like just straight up asks to be released because he wants to seek more guaranteed money elsewhere? Like,
Yeah, I
I think
don't.
honestly that's probably factoring into my ranking of Alvin Kamara as low as it is, because I do think, and maybe this is just again me projecting, but I cannot imagine a world in my brain where Alvin Kamara is still a Saint come the start of the season.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so I mean,
I'm getting very bold in this episode. I don't know why
I
I'm
like it.
feeling
I
so
like this.
bold. I can't wait to read the comments. But like from a contract situation, I just can't.
Yeah. The Saints are such a weird team, right? Like they are almost annually like $80 million over the cap, and they seem to find a way to make it
And they
work. So
never
like
have talent. Like, what's
I
going
know
on?
it's weird. Like outside of Chris Olave, like I wouldn't be surprised if anybody on that team is cut for contract reasons this offseason. But yeah, in that case, like things could definitely change, right? And maybe Alvin Kamara goes to like Dallas or something like that, and then we
And
could be
this is
optimistic.
probably like where I'm having my downfall as an analyst because I'm kind of almost baking that into my projection. But I mean, just even from like an Alvin Kamara standpoint, you look at his efficiency as a rusher hasn't exceeded 4 yards per attempt
Mhm,
in any of the last 3 years. The touchdown totals have been low. Posted a career low 2.51 yards after contact per attempt, a career low 22 missed forced tackles. Like I mean, there aren't many people that would argue that Alvin Kamara has looked good as a pure rusher. You have to just be
mhm.
totally dependent on that target volume. But ugh,
Yeah. But no, I think it's a good way to look at it, right? Because there is risk and there is that potential, like you said, with the contract. So I don't think that's a bad way to kind of approach it, especially at this point in the off season as well. Like there's ways to, that this there's a lot of ways that this could shake out still. So I think that's a fine
so
way to
like
look at Alvin Kamara this season.
I might have him on some of my teams come draft season. But
Mhm.
like for instance, he's a guy that I'm avoiding totally in best ball underdog drafts where I'm drafting right now because I do think that just looking at the numbers, it feels so likely that there has
Mhm.
to be something has to give with
Right.
the New Orleans Saints because even next year they're going to owe him a lot of money, which is why it makes even less sense to like restructure his deal. Like there's just not a lot of ways that the Saints can conceivably keep him on the roster, especially right now when he's like demanding all these guarantees. It's
Mhm.
just
Yeah.
yeah, so again, you made the point. I'm probably going to have more of him on my rosters on draft season. I'll probably move him up my rankings if he remains in the circumstance, but he's like a red flag for me.
Yeah. Nope, I like it. I like that way of looking at it. Next group here starts off with Tony Pollard as our consensus RB2, followed by a tier at running back 23 between Raheem Mostert and Zamir White. Then at running back 25, it's Ramondre Stevenson. And this is followed by another one of our bigger discrepancies here between the two of us and ADP, actually. It's Najee Harris, who he's being drafted as RB24 at the moment. You have him as RB17. I have him as RB31. So we're all over the place here with Najee. So you're more, like I said, you're more locked into the Steelers than I am. So I could be misreading this situation as well. So tell us what's got you high on Najee for 2024.
I think first of all, I very much acknowledge the presence and the talent of Jalen Warren. Jalen Warren was one of the most efficient running backs in the league last year, which I think makes a lot of people more nervous probably about Najee Harris than maybe I am. But I do want to point out the fact that, like, yeah, last year got off to a pretty slow start, but I actually think from somebody who covered the games for Behind the Steel Curtain, I watched every single second of Najee Harris, and guess what? Like the vision improved tenfold last year, and I think he was generally speaking down the stretch kind of the more reliable running back. And I think that just kind of showed overall in their usage, despite the fact that Jalen Warren was the more efficient running back, averaged 5.26 yards per carry, was just every advanced metric we can point out. Jalen Warren was among the best of all running backs in the league. But the Steelers still gave Najee Harris 255 rush attempts
Mhm.
to Jalen Warren's 149. They passed up on the fifth year option, which surprised me, but Najee Harris is entering a contract year. Word is that he's looked pretty fit overall. He's shed some weight, which is something that I had been hoping that he would do over the past couple of seasons. Like definitely while he had plenty of play strength, lacked a lot of that burst. And, we actually saw this with a former Pittsburgh Steeler, Le'Veon Bell, was a little chunky, came back, cut some weight, and then looked like this explosive back that you knew he could be when he was drafted. And I think that could be kind of an X factor for Najee Harris. But, especially looking back in like the last portions of the year, like I just don't really think that there was a lot to say that this team wanted to give Jaylen Warren the ball, like in these crucial moments. Like, again, second half of the season when they were finding some more success, 155 rush attempts, weeks 10 on, to Jaylen Warren's 93, despite that lack of efficiency. Saw some kind of crucial fumbles. I think there could be room for both of these running backs here in 2024 to have success. We know Arthur Smith wants to run the football. This is a newly reinvigorated offensive line, but like, do we really not think that Najee Harris is going to get 200 plus touches in 2023? Because if so, he should be drafted as an RB2 or higher, period.
Yeah. So that does help me feel better about Najee Harris for sure. Like RB31, I could afford to move him up here a little bit, but I am one of those people that is concerned about, Jaylen Warren taking more touches, right? Like, the team carry splits, you just look at it on the season as a whole, 52% for Najee, which was well below average for the team lead RB1, and then 32% for Jaylen Warren, which was the second highest in the league last season, for an RB2, behind only Arthur Smith's Atlanta Falcons, who is now, of course, offensive coordinator for the Steelers, right? So the other part of it for me, like, worth noting, like, was that Warren pretty much dominated the receiving role out of the backfield last season, right? 4.2 targets per game compared to just 1.8 for Najee. So again, PPR being a bit of a factor here for me again. I think they're a lot closer, and they hurt each other more than anything, where I don't want to rely on Najee as like a fantasy starter again this season, but I don't know. He's more of an RB3 for me, but I can see the argument. I could see the path for RB2 for sure.
But to even look at like their usage in these crucial situations, right? You look at their usage in the red zone. Najee Harris, 44 carries to Jaylen Warren's 19. Yeah. Inside the 5, Najee Harris, 11 carries to Jaylen Warren's 5, which, by the way, on those carries inside the 5, which they had very few opportunities to do, just based on the offense. But Najee Harris converted 5 of those 11 attempts inside the 5-yard line. Jaylen Warren didn't convert a single one to a touchdown. So like, even if you're just projecting like the goal line role, if you said that these guys are going to split touches straight down the middle, I'm still taking Najee Harris because I think the goal line role is so safe. And let's be real, this is a team that's going to have more opportunities along the goal line in 2023 than they did in 2024 than they did in 2023.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to lay it out here. And yeah, I could definitely afford to move up Najee a little bit in the rankings here. So along with Najee Harris, our other consensus RB26 is Zach Moss of the Cincinnati Bengals. And he's a player that we're both higher on ADP right now. He's going as RB31 on Sleeper. He's up my RB26, your RB23. Like, we're obviously believing in him more than the masses here. So we'll quickly pump his tires a little bit here. But like, Zach Moss, he was a workhorse last year when he was a starter, and we're going to keep talking about it, but volume matters more than anything else at the running back position, right? And it's a small 6-game sample from last year on a different team, but he at least showed that he was capable of handling a high-end workload. Averaged 23.7 opportunities per game last year when he was a starter. Like, that's more than Kyren Williams last year. It's more than Christian McCaffrey. Again, obviously small sample. I don't think that's the average we should expect with him in Cincinnati. But at the same time, like, the Bengals haven't been afraid to lean on one back in the past. And considering their options there, maybe they do so again, as long as Moss can be effective. Like, I like Chase Brown, but I think, there's potential for him to work in where Moss doesn't necessarily absorb like Joe Mixon's 18.9 opportunities per game. But even if he's around that 15 to 16 mark, like low end RB2, high end RB3, compared to his RB31 ADP right now is definitely, I think, an achievable bar to provide a strong return on investment there. So, yeah, how about you? You like Zach Moss obviously as well.
Of course. I love Zach Moss. And honestly, again, this is one of those situations where I could picture, Zach Moss maybe getting 60 to 70% of the running back touches, use Chase Brown as more of the explosive change of pace guy. But, based on the usage last year, like there was never really anything to indicate that, Chase Brown was kind of the heir apparent in this offense. He never played more than 18 snaps in a game. And again, you look at, the usage in these valuable situations. There wasn't a lot to say that they trusted Chase Brown in any of these vital situations. Joe Mixon had 59 carries inside the red zone to Chase Brown's 7. 21 carries inside the 5. Chase Brown didn't have a single one. Like, I have to imagine that goal line role is not going to suddenly go to Chase Brown when they didn't give him any of those opportunities in 2023. That's going to be Zach Moss's role. So like I said, even if they could split the touches 50-50, and I'm still going to give Zach Moss the edge here because I think that goal line role is just so safe.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, I think the reason, he's getting faded is just the potential that he ends up sucking as a lead back, which sure, it's possible. And maybe they go away from him. But again, like, it's not like the other guys behind him are perennial all pros either. So I'm perfectly fine taking the shot on Moss here in drafts if he gives me close to what Joe Mixon did last year in Cincy, that, 13 to 15 points per game. Should be a better offense with Joe Burrow back. I think that's a win here at his current ADP.
Love it.
Okay, let's do one more grouping of running backs now, and maybe we'll pull a sleeper or a favorite name from the rest of the list. But continuing down the consensus list, we have our first rookie running back, Jonathan Brooks, at RB28, Nick Chubb at RB29, who is being drafted as RB27. But I think as we get more information about his injury and recovery time, that'll change quite a bit. So we'll maybe give it some more time before diving into him in detail. Then at RB30, we have Javonte Williams. And at RB31, a player who we're both higher on than consensus here, who I think probably worth talking about. It's Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders. So Austin Eckler is being drafted ahead of Brian Robinson right now. And this to me feels 100% like a case of overvaluing the name more than anything else, because even in PPR, like, I'm not drafting Eckler over Robinson. Like, it's closer there in PPR, but nothing Eckler did last year gives me any sort of confidence in him this year, especially over Robinson, who was actually really good. Like, Robinson had a much better rushing grade, better missed tackles forced per attempt, better yards after contact per attempt, better first down touchdown rate, better yards per carry, better explosive run rate, even had more receiving touchdowns somehow, despite seeing about half the targets per game than Eckler. Like, I do expect Eckler to be the receiving back, but I also just don't believe that role is necessarily all that valuable, considering Jaden Daniels is at quarterback, who I think would much rather take off with the ball than dump it off to the running back. So, he's an older running back who is apparently afraid of touches. Like, he didn't want to be a workhorse anymore in LA, which is,
Understandable.
surprising. Yeah, but it's surprising to hear from a position that typically wants the opposite so that they can get paid appropriately, right? But that for me, I think it's enough for with Eckler. Like, give me Brian Robinson every single time. The ADP, the way they are right now with Eckler ahead of Robinson, that has to get flipped here soon, because Eckler's just not that guy anymore. I've already moved Eckler actually down even more in my ranks for the next update when I put that out, but I'm just out on him. I'm not drafting him at all this year.
Yeah, I'm also out, especially as you mentioned, Jaden Daniels, his position as a running and a scrambling quarterback, like that does diminish that upside, which is why, like, if you're gonna, want a tiebreaker between the two, like, I think Austin Eckler's role is probably going to be an integral one in terms of his leadership and that aspect that he brings to the locker room. But like, when you're talking about, from a touches standpoint, yeah, Brian Robinson is going to finish with far more touches. And I don't think the passing down work is going to be plentiful enough for that to really sway the rankings between the two when I think Robinson's going to get considerable more touches here in 2024.
Yeah. Yep, I am with you. And then lastly in that group, just so I don't forget to mention him as our consensus RB32, it was Devin Singletary now of the New York Giants. So there's a big one today for as far as amount of running backs here that we have a chance to go over. So why don't we cap it off here with maybe like a favorite pick from the players, like going outside of our consensus top 32. Could be any name, could be a sleeper or just a name we have ranked highly. We'll do a full sleepers episode later in the off season as well. But Kate, anyone in this final grouping for today that you'd want to expand on a bit?
I want to shout out Gus Edwards coming in as our consensus RB33. I have him at RB30. You have him at RB37, which is right on par with where he's currently being drafted via sleeper. From a standpoint of, who's going to lead the running back room in the LA Chargers offense, like I don't know, but I do know that J.K. Dobbins has not been healthy for his career, and he's coming off a ruptured Achilles. Like, that has to be a part of the conversation, that we don't even know if he's going to be healthy. We know that at their core, J.K. Dobbins is the much better running back, but Gus Edwards has been the guy who's been available. And I'm looking at the way that this offense seems to be shaking out with Jim Harbaugh, with Greg Roman as the offensive coordinator. They're going to run the ball. Like, it would not surprise me in the least if they lead the league in, rush attempts through the regular season. Like, that's what they want to do. That's what they built this offense to do. That is why they drafted Joe Alt. Like, that is why they invested in their offensive line, even despite the fact that like wide receiver was a huge need for them, I just look at Gus Edwards and I'm like, in this range, in like RB30 plus range, how many running backs can you reasonably look at and project to be like the likely leader in terms of total carries? Like, not many. And I think one of those players is Gus Edwards.
Yeah. Gus Edwards is a good shout. I was going to say
he's coming off a bad year too. So like, it's not as though he has a lot of efficiency metrics that are overly exciting, but would it surprise you if he has like 220 rush attempts in the season? Not at all.
No, I don't think so. And yeah, I mean, the touchdown totals obviously were insane last year, but like you said, the efficiency wise, it could still improve that a little bit as well. But I think for me in this group, I was going to say Jaylen Warren. I think I'll go Tyjae Spears. He's the one for me that I think I continue liking a fair bit, even though I also like Tony Pollard slightly more than ADP. Spears, even without his ACLs, he was awesome last year as a rookie, right? He commanded 4 targets per game. He was elusive with the ball in his hands. I think he's earned that right to carve out, the pass catching role out of the backfield in Tennessee. I do think Pollard is going to command most of the carries and the goal line work, which is why he's higher for me. But Spears' role is still one that I think can definitely be valuable again this year. If that offense really does end up being better than what we expect, what consensus expects them to be, then that's just another nice bonus for him, since there will be more opportunity for him to get on the field and get more touches. So I think that'd be my guy to kind of highlight here from this later group as a nice flex play this offseason.
Yeah, I think very flex worthy territory, and the ADP is so much more palatable. I mean, there was a point in the off season where, in best ball, we were seeing Tyjae Spears being drafted like RB15 or so. And you look at the advanced metrics, you look at the stable metrics, most of them were well within Tyjae Spears' favor. And yeah, maybe not going to be like a high volume RB, but I think he's probably going to make up for a lot of that in terms of, overall efficiency here in 2024.
Nice. I like it. So that is a wrap on another special edition of the podcast. We're going over our positional rankings, and we'll keep that going here for a couple more weeks. So thank you all for tuning in. And if you're watching on the YouTube, give us a shout in the comments who you think we're too high or low on. But do it nicely. Try not to make me cry. And while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe. We appreciate that very much. And Kate, we appreciate you as well for breaking down your ranks, providing your insight into your process. This was a fun exercise. So I look forward to continuing with wide receivers and tight ends in the coming weeks. So before you go, please remind everyone where they can find more of you and your work as well.
Yeah, give me a follow on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. That's Magdziuk. Got my work here on PFF, got some strength of schedule content here. As we said, never too early to start prepping for your drafts. Strength of schedule can be so important for some of those mid-tier players. So be sure to check that out.
Yeah, definitely good stuff there. And then, as for me, PFF.com, I have all my rankings and tiers articles up now on the site for free: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and even defensive line, linebacker, and defensive backs for you IDP degenerates. So go check those out now as well. Thank you all again for listening or watching. And until next time, peace out.